The snow comes early in the high Alps. It rolls down from the mountains like a slow, living tide, swallowing the roads, the farms, and the forests alike. Beneath its weight, the world grows quiet. Too quiet. Even the bells of the churches seem to fade into it. But if you listen, truly listen, another sound takes their place. Chains. Somewhere in the dark, they drag and rattle through the snow, not like the tread of boots or the creak of sleighs, but slower, heavier, purposeful, the sound of something searching. For most, winter has always been a time of warmth, of firelight and family, of feasts and carols. But for the people of the mountains, winter was never kind. It was a season of reckoning, a season that tested whether the light in your home and the goodness in your heart could survive the long dark. And if it could not, something else came instead. They say he walks when St. Nicholas rides, that he follows in his shadow. While one carries gifts and blessings, the other carries chains and punishment. Half man, half beast, born of fire and frost, he is the reflection in every story told to frighten a child into obedience. The claw in the chimney, the hoof print by the door, the whisper in the snowstorm that sounds too much like a growl. They call him many names: Knecht Ruprecht, the Yule Devil, the Christmas Demon. But across centuries and borders, one name remains: Krampus, the one who comes not to give, but to take the bad children, to take the warmth from a sinner's heart, to take, for himself, the part of Christmas the church could never tame. So when the bells ring in December and the snow begins to fall, remember, not every sound in the night belongs to St. Nicholas. Some still belong to him, and his chains have never stopped moving. Forget the jingle bells, forget the twinkling lights and the comforting aroma of pine. Before St. Nicholas, before even the very concept of a holiday season, there was only winter. For the ancient peoples of the Alpine mountains, winter wasn't a time for celebration. It was a hungry, relentless beast. 6 months of suffocating darkness, blinding blizzards, and a cold so profound it felt like the very world was holding its breath, waiting for you to fail. Imagine trying to survive this. Every snowfall a threat, every dwindling food store a countdown. And as the sun retreated, so too did the perceived safety of the world. The long nights weren't just dark, they were alive. Alive with the ancient, unreasoning fears that clawed their way out of the shadows, whispering of things that stalked the frozen peaks and hidden valleys. This wasn't just folklore, this was survival. This was the deep genetic dread of being alone in the vast, indifferent expanse of a world that actively seemed to want you gone. From this primal fear, from the very ice and stone of the mountains themselves, emerged the old gods of winter. These weren't the comforting, benevolent deities we might imagine. Number. These were formidable, often monstrous entities. Horned, fur-clad, and utterly untamed, they were the embodiment of nature's brutal, beautiful, and unforgiving power. They were the roaring blizzard, the stillness of death, the tenacity of life clawing its way back from oblivion. Their presence was felt in every groan of the wind, every splintering branch, every ominous crack of ice underfoot. They didn't offer salvation. They demanded respect, sacrifice, and an unwavering acknowledgement of humanity's fragile place in a savage world. Among the most unsettling of these were the Perchten, not just simple mask-wearers. These were complex, dualistic spirits that swept through villages during the Rauhnachter, the 12 terrifying nights between Christmas and Epiphany. Think of them as winter's cleansing crew, but with a terrifying twist. The Schönperchten, the beautiful ones, were adorned with towering, intricate headpieces, often laden with symbols of prosperity, their dances elegant, almost hypnotic, meant to bless the harvest and usher in good fortune. But then there were the Schiakperchten, the ugly or wild ones. These were the true nightmare fuel. Grotesque, demonic masks, ragged furs, sharp teeth, and eyes that seemed to glow in the firelight. They'd crash through the night, wielding whips and chains, their cowbells clanging a discordant, deafening rhythm, not just to drive away evil spirits, but to embody them. Their purpose was purification through terror, to purge the lingering evils of the old year, sometimes by literally beating them out of you. Imagine hearing that cacophony approaching, seeing those monstrous forms surge out of the darkness, knowing they were there to cleanse, yes, but also to judge and to punish. It was a violent, primal display, a reminder that even blessings could come with a brutal price. Then, Deep in the ancient frozen forests lurked the silent, powerful presence of the antlered god Cernunnos. While often associated with the Celts, his archetype, the horned master of animals, lord of the wild, resonated across countless pre-Christian European cultures. He was depicted with a majestic stag's antlers, often seated, surrounded by forest creatures, holding symbols of wealth and rebirth. Cernunnos wasn't about violence for its own sake, but rather the cycle itself: life, death, and regeneration. In winter, his presence would have been acutely felt. He embodied the dormancy of the forest, the hardened earth, the hidden life beneath the snow, all waiting for the brutal patience of nature to run its course before the eventual explosion of spring. He was a god of profound, ancient wisdom, but also of raw, untamed power. His gaze would have held the silent, cold intelligence of both predator and prey, a stark embodiment of winter's unyielding lessons. To disrespect the wild was to disrespect Cernunnos, and that was a mistake no ancient hunter would dare make. And on the darkest, most blustery nights, when the wind screamed through the mountain passes like a banshee, the very air itself seemed to carry the howls of the wild hunt. This wasn't just a metaphor, this was a deeply ingrained, widespread terror. Known by countless names, Oscarai, Herlathing, Vutendus here, it was a furious, spectral cavalcade of ghosts, spirits, and monstrous beasts sweeping across the night sky, trampling all in its path. Led by various figures, Odin or Wotan, Frau Holle, or even the terrifying Perchta herself, the wild hunt was an unstoppable, destructive force. Its passage was heralded by deafening winds, the thunder of countless hoofbeats, the barking of phantom hounds, and the agonizing cries of the damned. To hear it was to be gripped by paralyzing fear. To witness it? That was a death sentence, or a harbinger of untold misfortune. Plague, war, famine. People would barricade their doors, extinguish their fires, and huddle in silent prayer, hoping its infernal procession would pass them by, lest they be swept up into its horrifying retinue, dragged into the frozen abyss. It was the ultimate manifestation of winter's destructive power, a chilling reminder that the veil between worlds was thin and hungry spirits lurked just beyond the firelight. These were the echoes of a world untamed, where survival meant not just enduring, but appeasing the very elements that sought to consume you. A world where the forest wasn't just timber, but a living, breathing entity, teeming with spirits both malevolent and ancient. A world where the mountains were not just stone, but sacred places, battlegrounds of primordial deities, and silent witnesses to generations of human struggle against a truly terrifying adversary. The rituals performed during these brutal winters, the roaring fires, the masked dances, the humble offerings, were not mere superstitions. They were acts of sheer desperation and profound necessity. They were humanity's desperate attempt to impose some semblance of order on a chaotic world, to coax the sun back, to keep the wild spirits at bay, and to ensure the eventual, precious return of spring's life-giving warmth. This was the profound spiritual landscape of the Alpine heartland, a tapestry woven from raw fear and unyielding resilience. A knowledge, passed down through generations, whispered around crackling fires, a warning shared from parent to terrified child. The figures of the Perchta, the silent power of Cernunnos, and the thundering dread of the wild hunt were not just characters in a story. They were the very air these people breathed, the shadows that danced in the firelight, the unseen presences that made the winter nights so long, so cold, and so utterly perilous. They were the primordial forces that demanded sacrifice and respect, the elemental powers that shaped not only the land, but the very psyche of its inhabitants, instilling a deep-seated apprehension that lingered even as new beliefs began to take tentative root. These were the fundamental, terrifying truths of existence in a world not yet tamed by modernity or softened by the comforts of a new, more merciful religion. The fear was real, palpable and deeply embedded, and it was from this ancient dread, from the chilling awe inspired by these frozen gods and ancient entities, that something new would eventually crawl forth, something forged in the crucible of pagan belief and nascent Christian doctrine. Something that embodied the raw, untamed power of the old ways, yet twisted into a new, more focused form. Half man, half beast, half punishment. A creature destined to become an eternal shadow to the encroaching light, a stark reminder that even in the brightest tales, the echoes of ancient fear persist, waiting for the world to forget what winter truly meant. As the Roman Empire, that colossus of antiquity, began its inexorable expansion across the European continent, it brought with it not only legions and laws, but also a transformative new ideology, Christianity. This nascent faith, with its revolutionary message of hope, redemption, and a benevolent, singular God, swept across the fragmented pagan lands like a slow-burning wildfire. It promised an end to suffering, a path to eternal salvation, and a divine order far removed from the capricious whims of nature's ancient gods. But when this burgeoning faith, with its gentle parables and forgiving spirit, finally reached the isolated, fiercely traditional Alpine valleys, it encountered a profound and utterly unique problem. How, precisely, do you convert a people whose very survival, whose entire world-view, is intrinsically intertwined with the raw, untamed forces of nature, with ancient, terrifying spirits of winter, and with a cosmic balance between light and profound darkness? You don't simply arrive with scrolls and sermons and expect millennia of primal fear, ancestral reverence, and hard-won wisdom to vanish overnight. You don't effortlessly erase the deep-seated dread of the wild hunt, or the visceral awe inspired by the Frighten. These beliefs were not mere superstitions. They were the very bedrock of their existence, the stories that explained the brutal rhythms of their lives, the rituals that, they believed, ensured the sun's return and the meager harvest's survival. No, to truly convert these people, to truly bring them into the fold, the new faith had to adapt. It had to absorb, and, most importantly, it had to twist. And so, from the melting snows of dying paganism and the tenacious roots of the burgeoning Christian faith, something truly extraordinary and profoundly terrifying began to take form. This wasn't a sudden cataclysmic birth, like a god springing forth fully formed. Instead, it was a gradual, almost insidious evolution, a slow metamorphosis of belief, fear, and cultural identity. The terrifying horned spirits of the Frighten, the wild, chaotic forces of the ancient hunt, the deep, primeval dread inspired by the silent, brooding forests. They didn't simply vanish into the mists of forgotten history. They lingered, shapeless and potent, waiting for a new form, a new purpose. They simply found a new vessel, a new identity through which to channel their ancient, primal power. Imagine, if you will, the early Christian missionaries. Pious and determined men, often brave to the point of recklessness, venturing into these remote mountain villages. They carried their sacred texts, their crosses, and their unwavering conviction. They preached of St. Nicholas, a kind bishop from distant lands, a paragon of charity and generosity who brought modest gifts to good children, a figure of pure, unadulterated light and divine grace. He was a symbol of hope, a gentle guardian. But the villagers, with their gnarled hands, weather-beaten faces, and eyes that had seen the raw brutality of countless winters, listened with a peculiar skepticism. They looked at this gentle saint, this benevolent giver, and they pondered, where is the balance? Where is the other side of the coin? Where is the stick to punish the wicked? Where is the shadow to make the light meaningful and legitimate? In their deeply ingrained worldview, kindness, generosity, and mercy, while appreciated, held little true power, little lasting impact if they were not juxtaposed against the chilling, undeniable specter of punishment, of consequence looming just behind them. For them, balance was everything. The sun demanded the shadow, life demanded death, good demanded evil. The church, in its shrewd and often pragmatic approach to evangelization, quickly grasped this cultural imperative. They understood that simply condemning and attempting to eradicate these deeply ingrained pagan figures, especially the horned, cloven-hoofed, overtly demonic ones that were so woven into the very fabric of the winter rituals, was a futile endeavor. Such attempts had, in the past, often led to resentment, resistance, and outright rebellion. So, they adopted a far more subtle and ultimately more effective strategy. They co-opted them, they demonized them, certainly, painting them as servants of evil rather than independent forces. But more importantly, they domesticated them, grafting these wild, untamed pagan figures onto the new Christian calendar, granting them a subservient yet incredibly potent role within the new religious framework. The wild, chaotic demons of the old ways were given a new, singular purpose: the Punisher, the Dark Enforcer, the necessary shadow to St. Nicholas's shining ethereal light. This, then, is the crucible in which Krampus was forged. Not as a god in his own right, not as a deity to be worshipped, but as a beast, a monstrous reflection of human failings, a tangible instrument of divine retribution. His very name, thought to derive from the old High German word Krampen, meaning claw, already painted a vivid, terrifying picture. He emerged as a horrifying half-man, half-goat demon hybrid, a nightmarish entity with grotesque cloven hooves, shaggy, often soot-black fur, razor-sharp claws that could rend flesh, and a long, often monstrous, serpentine tongue lolling from his gaping maw. His face was a contortion of bestial fury and demonic glee, often adorned with curving, formidable horns that evoked the ancient wild gods, yet now corrupted and redefined. He was the visual, visceral manifestation of everything the Church desperately wanted to preach against: sin, temptation, damnation. Yet paradoxically, he was also everything the villagers instinctively understood about winter's harsh judgment, about cosmic balance, and about the absolute necessity of consequences. He was the embodiment of fear, repurposed for piety. Crucially, the early priests, instead of vehemently railing against him, instead of attempting to banish him back to the perceived hell from which he supposedly came, shrewdly tolerated him. More than that, they strategically incorporated him. During the annual St. Nicholas procession, a seemingly wholesome, newly established Christian event intended to showcase the benevolence of the new faith, Krampus would make his dramatic, terrifying appearance. Think of the scene unfolding in a dim, torchlit village square. The benevolent bishop, St. Nicholas, stately and serene in his holy vestments, moving slowly through the reverent crowd, offering small, symbolic apples, nuts, and perhaps a few modest coins to the good, obedient children. His presence was one of quiet grace, a symbol of divine love, but just behind him, a grotesque, clanking, snarling terror would loom. This was Krampus, dragging heavy, rattling chains that once bound the devil, now used to signify his own eternal damnation and his subjugation, waving ominous birch switches and often carrying a sturdy woven basket or sack on his back, ready to snatch the disobedient, the truly wicked children and drag them to a far, far worse fate than a mere lump of coal. It was a brilliant, chilling piece of psychological manipulation, an ingenious act of spiritual branding. St. Nicholas offered the reward, the sweet promise of salvation and temporal blessings. Krampus, by terrifying contrast, offered raw, visceral, inescapable punishment, the stark reality of damnation and corporal suffering. It was a terrifyingly effective carrot-and-stick approach, tailored perfectly to the sensibilities of a people accustomed to the brutal realities of their existence. The spectacle served as a powerful, living sermon. These early processions were far from quaint, charming folk festivals. They were deeply unsettling spectacles, imbued with an atmosphere of genuine apprehension. Villagers, still clinging to their ancient ways, still holding deep within their collective memory the terror of the Perchten and the Wild Hunt, would don crude, often terrifying masks carved from wood, wear animal furs, and attach real horns, becoming the beast themselves. Picture the scene unfolding. The biting alpine air, the flickering, dancing torchlight casting monstrous shadows on ancient stone walls, the ominous jingle of real iron chains dragging on frozen ground, the guttural roars and shrieks of the masked figures. And then, bursting forth from the pre-dawn darkness, these primal figures, smelling of animal hide and wood smoke, would surge through the village streets. They weren't just playing a role, they were, in a very real sense, channeling the ancient dread, embodying the lingering fear. The The priests, in their holy vestments, would stand by, perhaps even offering a symbolic blessing or exorcism to the procession, implicitly acknowledging that this dark, seemingly demonic force, though terrifying, now served a Christian purpose: to enforce moral order through the most abject, visceral fear imaginable. It was a delicate, indeed dangerous, theological dance. The Church was, in essence, sending a clear, unambiguous message. These dark, pagan forces exist, yes, but they are now subservient to God's ultimate will. They are not to be worshipped, but they can be used. They will punish the wicked, certainly, but only those who truly deserve it, only those who defy the new divine order. And the villagers, in their pragmatic wisdom, understood this complex theology. They saw the horned, cloven-hoofed beast, and they recognized the old, familiar terrors of the pagan world. But now those terrors were framed within a new, powerful narrative of sin and retribution, of Christian morality and the consequences of transgressing it. Krampus was not just a symbol. He was the walking, snarling, physical manifestation of Christian hellfire, delivered directly to your doorstep, a chilling warning that God's wrath could be made flesh. So, while St. Nicholas brought the sweet promise of salvation, of heavenly grace and earthly blessings, Krampus brought the chilling, undeniable reality of damnation, of earthly suffering and eternal torment. He was the embodiment of the bitter consequences of straying from the straight and narrow path, a living, breathing deterrent more potent than any sermon. No abstract sermon on sin, no biblical passage describing the fires of hell could quite convey the bone-deep terror of eternal damnation, like the sight of a demon with razor claws and a sturdy basket, ready to drag you to the underworld, or perhaps worse, to be drowned in an icy river. In the remote, unforgiving alpine valleys, where life was already a constant, brutal struggle against the elements, where survival was a daily gamble, this terrifying yet structured approach to morality made perfect, horrifying sense. It resonated with their innate understanding of the harsh balance of the world. The birth of Krampus, therefore, wasn't just a quirky folktale, a charming piece of local color. It was a profound and ingenious act of cultural syncretism, a terrifyingly effective fusion of ancient pagan dread and the burgeoning tenets of early Christian morality. He was a beast born of necessity, created to enforce piety through pure, unadulterated fear, to be the shadow that defined the light. He became the chilling, tangible embodiment of divine retribution, a primal force repurposed, his chains rattling not just from his own damnation, but from the weight of centuries of ancient, unresolved fear. A fear that would continue to haunt the deepest corners of winter nights, a fear that would rattle its chains through centuries to come, refusing to be silenced, refusing to be forgotten. Krampus. His very name, a guttural growl in the throat of winter, already evokes a chill. But it's not just his horrifying appearance, the shaggy fur, the grotesque horns, the slavering tongue that cemented his place in the darkest corners of alpine folklore. No, it's his tools, his instruments of terror. These aren't mere props, they are ancient symbols imbued with centuries of meaning, each one a chilling testament to his purpose: to punish, to bind, and to abduct. To truly understand Krampus, to feel the cold dread he inspires, we must dissect the very implements he wields: the rattling chains, the stinging birch rods, and the terrifying basket. Each has a history, a symbolism that reaches back far beyond the birth of Christianity, connecting this demonic beast to the deepest, most primal fears of humanity. Let's begin with the chains. Imagine the scene: a frigid alpine night, the air thick with anticipation and terror. Then from the deepest shadows, you hear it. A metallic clanking, a dragging, rhythmic jingle that cuts through the stillness like a cold shard of ice. That sound alone, before you even see him, signals his arrival. Krampus's chains are arguably his most iconic and terrifying accessory. They are not merely for show. Historically, chains carry immense symbolic weight, particularly in religious and folkloric contexts. For the early Christians, chains were explicitly linked to the binding of evil. In the New Testament, we find passages describing angels binding demons with chains and casting them into the abyss. Satan himself is often depicted as being bound in chains, so when Krampus appears, dragging heavy iron chains, the message is chillingly clear. He is a creature of the underworld, a demon, and though he may roam free for a night, he is ultimately a bound entity, serving a higher, albeit dark, purpose. His chains are a grim reminder of his origins and his fate, but their symbolism stretches even further back, into the pagan heartland. In ancient shamanic traditions, chains or ropes could be used for binding spirits, both malevolent and protective. They represented control, containment, and the power to influence the unseen forces. When the pagan traditions clashed with nascent Christianity, these symbols didn't disappear, they were recontextualized. Krampus's chains, therefore, become a terrifying bridge between worlds. They bind him, yes, but they also bind you to him if you are wicked. They are the instruments that pull the naughty child from the hearth's safety into the unknown, into the darkness. The sound itself is designed to instill fear, to create a visceral, almost instinctual alarm. It's the sound of imprisonment, of being caught, of the inevitable approach of judgment. It's a sound that promises no escape, no mercy. The rattling isn't just noise, it's the rhythm of impending doom. Then there is the birch switch, the root. This isn't just any stick, it's a bundle of dried birch branches, often tied together with ribbons, a deceptively simple implement with a long and brutal history. The birch rod, in various forms, has been a tool of corporal punishment across European cultures for centuries, particularly for children. It's a harsh, stinging reminder of discipline, designed to inflict pain without necessarily causing lasting injury, but leaving a clear, burning sensation that lingers long after the blow. Its use was commonplace in homes and schools, a deeply ingrained method of enforcing obedience. But like the chains, the birch switch carries a far older, deeper symbolism. The birch tree itself, in ancient pagan beliefs, held powerful significance. It was often seen as a symbol of purification, of cleansing, of new beginnings. Its branches were used in spring rituals to beat away the lingering spirits of winter, to awaken fertility in the fields and animals, to purify people and livestock. This act of beating or switching was a ritualistic purification, designed to drive out stagnation and invite vitality. So, when Krampus arrives, wielding his birch switch, he isn't just punishing, he is performing a twisted, demonic parody of an ancient purification rite. He is cleansing the naughty child of their wickedness, not through gentle awakening, but through pain, through a brutal, physical expurgation of their sins. The act of being switched by Krampus is not just about the pain, it's about the shame, the public humiliation. Imagine being a child dragged from your family, subjected to this stinging ritual in front of your peers and elders. It's a terror that transcends the physical. The birch switch is a visceral reminder of human vulnerability, of the power wielded by this monstrous figure, and of the stark consequences of moral transgression. It embodies the harsh discipline of the unforgiving alpine environment itself, where errors in judgment could lead to severe, even fatal consequences. The sting of the birch is the sting of winter's judgment, sharp, cold, and utterly uncompromising. And finally, we arrive at perhaps the most truly horrifying of Krampus's accoutrements, the basket, or sometimes a sack, a tub, or even a woven pannier strapped to his back. This seems innocuous enough at first glance, a simple carrying device. But its purpose, its ultimate function, is what elevates it from mere implement to an object of absolute dread. The basket is for abduction. It is for carrying off the wicked. The symbolism of abduction, of being taken away from the safety of home and family, is one of humanity's most ancient and profound fears. From myths of Persephone dragged to the underworld, to tales of changelings snatched by fae, to the very real historical fear of children being stolen, the idea of being taken, never to return, strikes at the heart of our deepest vulnerabilities. For the alpine villagers, this fear would have been particularly acute. The mountains could be treacherous. People could disappear in blizzards, fall into crevasses, or be lost to wild animals. To be carried off by Krampus, therefore, tapped into a very real and ever-present threat. But Krampus's abduction is far more sinister. Where does he take these children? The folklore offers several chilling possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Some tales speak of him carrying them back to his lair in the deepest, darkest parts of the forest, to be tormented for a year. Others suggest he takes them to the underworld, a direct conduit to hell itself, echoing the Christian concept of eternal damnation. Still others mention that he throws them into icy rivers, drowning them, a brutal echo of the freezing deaths that could claim the unwary in the harsh alpine environment. Perhaps most unsettling are the tales that imply he takes them to eat them, a visceral, cannibalistic horror that taps into the most primordial fears of being consumed. The basket, then, is not merely a container. It is a portable prison, a gateway to the unknown, a vessel of final judgment. It represents the ultimate removal from society, from warmth, from love, from existence itself. It is the tool that transforms a naughty child into a statistic, a missing person, a soul lost to the demon. Its presence on Krampus's back is a constant, visible threat, a chilling promise of a fate far worse than a whipping. It speaks to the terrifying finality of his judgment, the ultimate consequence of being truly, irredeemably bad. These tools, these implements of terror, the chains, the birch switch, the basket, are not just random accessories. They are deeply interconnected, forming a cohesive narrative of judgment and punishment. The chains announce his arrival, symbolize his infernal origin and his power to bind. The birch switch delivers the immediate, stinging pain, the physical manifestation of discipline and purification. And the basket, silently menacing, holds the ultimate threat, the terrifying promise of abduction and a fate unknown, a fate whispered only in the darkest nightmares. Together, they create a terrifyingly effective psychological profile for Krampus. He is the enforcer who uses sound to announce his presence, pain to inflict immediate retribution, and the threat of permanent disappearance to ensure absolute obedience. Each tool reinforces the others, building a crescendo of fear that leaves no room for doubt about his purpose. This combination made him incredibly potent in the pre-modern alpine villages, where children learned quickly that the kind Saint Nicholas might bring joy, but Krampus brought consequences that could haunt them forever. Moreover, the materials themselves add to the authenticity of the terror. Raw iron for the chains, with its cold, hard, unyielding nature. Natural birch wood, pliable yet stinging, a direct connection to the forest. Woven wicker or coarse sackcloth for the basket, rustic and utterly practical for its ghastly purpose. These aren't polished fantastical items, they are drawn from the very fabric of alpine life, making Krampus's threat feel incredibly tangible, incredibly real. He isn't an abstract monster, he's a demon whose methods are rooted in the harsh realities of their world. The evolution of these tools, from pagan purification rites to Christian symbols of damnation, perfectly mirrors the evolution of Krampus himself. He is a syncretic figure, a patchwork of ancient fears and new moral imperatives. His chains bind the old demons to the new god. His switch purifies the soul, albeit through pain, in a new Christian context. His basket abducts the wicked, sending them to a hell described by Christian doctrine, yet reminiscent of the ancient underworlds. He is the bridge between the two worlds, a terrifying figure of transition, ensuring that the old fears are never truly forgotten, only reshaped. And this reshaping, this integration, is what made him so enduring. The fear he inspired was not just for misbehavior, it was a fear of the wilderness, of the unknown, of death, of spiritual corruption. His tools tapped into these deep-seated anxieties, making him a terrifyingly effective enforcer of social and moral order in a world where authority often struggled to reach the remote mountain communities. He was the law, the judge, and the executioner, wrapped in fur and dragging chains, a truly chilling embodiment of winter's unforgiving justice. So the next time you hear a distant jingle of bells around Christmas, remember the chilling counterpoint of Krampus's chains. Feel the phantom sting of the birch switch, and glimpse, just for a moment, the dark void of the basket, waiting. These aren't just details, they are the very essence of Krampus, tools wielded by a beast born of ancient fears and Christian fire, designed to inflict a terror that resonates with the deepest, most primal parts of our souls. A terror that reminds us, winter always has its teeth, and judgment always has its tools. For centuries, Krampus existed in a precarious balance. He was the dark shadow to St. Nicholas's light, a terrifying, yet understood part of the alpine winter. His chains rattled, his switches stung, and his basket loomed large in the imaginations of children and adults alike. He was a force for order, a chilling embodiment of consequences in a world that craved moral structure. But as centuries turned, as Europe marched slowly from the medieval into the early modern and then into the Enlightenment, this dark tradition began to chafe against the evolving sensibilities of power. The Church, which had once shrewdly tolerated and co-opted him, eventually deemed him too wild, too pagan, too demonic. The first serious attempts at suppression began in earnest in the 16th and 17th centuries, intensifying through the 18th and 19th centuries. This wasn't a sudden, unified decree, but a gradual, persistent effort by both ecclesiastical and later, secular authorities. The reasons were complex, rooted in shifting religious doctrine, the rise of rationalism, and a growing discomfort with anything that smacked of superstition or paganism. The very traits that made Krampus so effective in the early days, his raw, visceral terror, his blatant pagan origins, his undeniable connection to primal fears, now made him a target. Consider the perspective of the Catholic Church. As the Counter-Reformation gained momentum in the 16th and 17th centuries, there was a concerted effort to purify Christian worship, to strip away anything perceived as extraneous, superstitious, or heretical. The lines between folklore and devil worship became increasingly blurred, and in the zealous drive to solidify Catholic doctrine, figures like Krampus, with their undeniable demonic aesthetics and their direct lineage to pre-Christian spirits, became an embarrassment, a relic of a darker past that needed to be expunged. How could the Church preach of an all-loving God and a benevolent Saint Nicholas, while simultaneously endorsing a terrifying horned demon who snatched children? The internal contradiction became too glaring. The Church's efforts weren't always direct confrontation. Sometimes it was subtle pressure on local priests to discourage the tradition. Other times, it involved explicit denunciations from the pulpit, condemning Krampus as a tool of the devil, an un-Christian practice that lured the faithful away from true worship. Priests were instructed to refuse sacraments to participants, to publicly shame those who continued the practices. Imagine the immense social pressure in small, tightly knit, devout communities. To defy the Church could mean ostracization, or worse, the fear of eternal damnation itself. Yet despite these spiritual threats, the tradition persisted. Why? Because it filled a void. The simple concept of Saint Nicholas, while comforting, lacked the inherent terror that gave meaning to moral boundaries in a harsh, unpredictable world. Krampus wasn't just a demon, he was a living, breathing code of conduct. He was immediate, physical, and deeply ingrained in the local psyche. The fear he inspired was a powerful tool for parenting and community cohesion. For generations, children had been told, "Be good, or Krampus will get you." This wasn't a whimsical threat, it was a deeply serious one, echoing the very real dangers of their environment. So when the Church tried to suppress him, it was akin to trying to suppress winter itself, an impossible, unnatural act. As the Enlightenment dawned and spread through the 18th century, new philosophical currents also began to work against Krampus. Rationalism, the belief in human reason as the primary source of knowledge, championed logic, order, and scientific inquiry. Superstition, folklore, and anything that couldn't be explained by rational thought were increasingly seen as relics of an ignorant past, impediments to progress. Krampus, a horned demon of pure irrational fear, was the antithesis of this new intellectual movement. Educated elites, government officials, and urban populations began to view Krampus customs as primitive, vulgar, and unbecoming of civilized society. This led to more direct interventions from secular authorities, particularly in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which encompassed many of the regions where Krampus was prevalent. Bans were issued, public displays of Krampus were outlawed, there were attempts to fine participants, to confiscate masks and costumes. Imagine officers of the law sent from distant, enlightened cities, attempting to enforce these bans in remote mountain villages, where the Krampuslauf was a deeply meaningful, almost sacred, annual event. These were often clashes of culture, of worldview, between a centralized, modernizing state and deeply entrenched local traditions. There are accounts, both anecdotal and historical, of authorities literally setting fires to burn masks and costumes, a grim echo of ancient pagan bonfires, but now turned against the very symbols they once represented. Imagine the scene: a pile of grotesque wooden masks, painstakingly carved, imbued with generations of spiritual power, being cast into a pyre, their painted faces melting, their horns curling in the flames as villagers watch, perhaps in silent defiance, perhaps in despair. This act was meant to be a symbolic purification, a burning away of the old ways, a declaration of modernity and rationality. Yet, the myth persisted. It couldn't be killed. What cannot be eradicated often finds a way to adapt, to mutate, to survive. In the face of official suppression, Krampus didn't disappear. He simply went underground. Celebrations became more clandestine, shifting from public squares to hidden forest clearings or taking place under the cloak of deepest night, away from prying eyes. The masks became more elaborate, more terrifying, almost a form of defiance. The rituals became more intense, fueled by the very act of resistance. This period of suppression, spanning from the 17th into the early 20th century, effectively pushed Krampus out of the mainstream and into the realm of secret tradition. He became a whispered legend, a warning delivered in hushed tones, a spectre that still haunted the peripheries of acceptable society. It's a powerful testament to the resilience of fear itself. The authorities could ban the physical manifestation, they could burn the masks, but they couldn't extinguish the primal dread, the deep-seated understanding that winter, and indeed human nature, had a dark side that demanded recognition. The efforts to suppress Krampus were arguably most successful during periods of heightened political and social control. For instance, after Austria's annexation by Nazi Germany in 1938, the Krampus traditions were again actively discouraged, viewed as pagan, un-Germanic, and a potential distraction from official Nazi ideology. The regime sought to control all aspects of cultural life, and a wild, autonomous figure like Krampus didn't fit into their meticulously crafted narratives of national identity. But even then, in the shadows of one of history's most oppressive regimes, the Krampuslauf continued in secret, a defiant flicker of tradition against overwhelming power. The very act of suppression, ironically, often strengthened the resolve of those who kept the tradition alive. It transformed Krampus from a mere folk figure into a symbol of cultural resistance, a defiant emblem of Alpine identity against external pressures. The masks, once tools of terror and ritual, became badges of honor, worn by those who refused to let their heritage die. The secret gatherings reinforced community bonds, turning shared fear into shared defiance. By the mid-20th century, as the world emerged from the shadow of war and fascism, the rigid grip of suppression began to loosen. The church, too, began to soften its stance on many local traditions. What had been condemned as devilry slowly began to be re-evaluated as cultural heritage, as quaint folklore. The fear, however, never truly left. It simply waited. It endured, transmuted and hidden. Behind the masks, behind the whispers, a powerful undercurrent in the collective subconscious of the Alpine communities. The tone of this period is one of resilience. It's the story of what cannot be killed. What is condemned simply retreats, only to return with renewed vigor when the opportunity arises. It speaks to the enduring power of primal human emotions and the deep-seated need for cultural expression. The attempts to eradicate Krampus ultimately failed because he wasn't just a character. He was an idea, an instinct, a powerful archetype that resonated too deeply within the human experience to be legislated or prayed away. In the quiet corners of the mountains, as the old masks were hidden in attics and the birch rods tucked away, the legend simmered. It was kept alive by grandmothers' warnings, by campfire tales, by the memory of the clanking chains and the stinging switch. It became a shared secret, a testament to the enduring power of fear and the unyielding spirit of tradition. The fires that burned the masks could not burn the memory, nor could they erase the primal connection to the ancient, untamed forces that Krampus so perfectly embodied. He was waiting. waiting for the right moment to step back out of the shadows, ready to once again unleash his brand of terrifying justice upon a world that had tried so hard to forget him. His resilience was a chilling echo of winter itself, relentless, patient, and ultimately unconquerable. After centuries of relentless suppression, of being driven into the deepest, most inaccessible shadows by the unwavering decrees of the church and the growing rationalism of secular authorities, Krampus didn't merely cling to survival, he thrived in secret. He simmered beneath the surface of Alpine culture like a dormant volcano, a dark, persistent current, a primal fear, carefully preserved in whispers and hidden rituals. He patiently waited for the opportune moment, for the societal shifts that would allow him to erupt back into the public consciousness, or rather the thrilling, chaotic darkness of open celebration. And erupt he did, with a thunderous, rattling vengeance. Today, he reigns supreme on the night of December 5th, the chilling eve before the more benevolent St. Nicholas Day, a night now globally known and anticipated as Krampusnacht. This is no longer a quiet, hushed tradition observed behind locked doors. This is a visceral, thunderous spectacle that commands attention. Imagine the scene, the biting, penetrating cold of early December, a crispness in the air that promises a real winter. Snow, often fresh and sparkling, dusts the ancient cobblestones of quaint Austrian towns, Bavarian villages, South Tyrolean hamlets, and Slovenian cities. The very air itself crackles, not just with the frigid temperatures, but with an almost palpable sense of anticipation, a nervous energy. Families gather, bundled against the cold, children clinging tightly to parents, their faces a complex mixture of wide-eyed apprehension and thrilled, almost mischievous excitement dancing in their expressions. The comforting, familiar smells of pine, warming glühwein or schnapps, and burning wood from countless hearths hang heavy in the air. But underneath these festive aromas, there's an almost electric metallic scent of primal energy, a distinct whiff of something ancient and wild about to be unleashed. The air itself seems to vibrate with a tension that is both terrifying and exhilarating. This is the night of the Krampuslauf, literally, the Krampus Run, a term that barely begins to capture the sheer intensity and immersive nature of the event. These are not simply parades, not quaint processions of costumed figures. Number. They are immersive, terrifying, almost cathartic experiences, a riotous explosion of ancient folklore meeting modern spectacle, an organized chaos designed to thrill and confront. What once began as small, clandestine gatherings in remote, isolated villages, hidden from the disapproving gaze of the powerful, has now transformed into a major cultural phenomenon. A destination event drawing thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, of eager spectators, pilgrims of fear, all yearning to experience the chilling thrill. At the very heart of the Krampuslauf lies the Krampuspassen, the Krampus groups or clubs. These are not casual associations. They are dedicated, often multi-generational communities of enthusiasts, craftsmen, and performers who meticulously craft their elaborate costumes, terrifying masks, and distinct personas throughout the entire year. For these individuals and families, participating in a pass is far, far more than just dressing up for a show. It's a passionate, almost sacred dedication to preserving, embodying, and perpetuating a powerful cultural heritage. Each group, each pass, strives with fierce pride to outdo the next in terms of fright factor, authenticity, craftsmanship, and sheer visceral impact. They invest countless hours and significant resources into creating their unique, monstrous identities. As dusk inexorably deepens into the inky blackness of the winter night, a low, guttural roar begins to rumble and echo in the distance. It's a sound that seems to come from the very earth itself, deep and resonant. Then, the auditory signature truly begins. A metallic, jarring, rhythmic clang of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of heavy iron chains dragging, rattling, and colliding against the frozen ground. This chilling sound is punctuated by the deep, resonant thud of hooves, real hooves, or incredibly convincing replicas, and the sharp, insistent crack of birch switches lashing through the air. It's a sound designed not merely to be heard, but to be felt, to bypass your rational, logical mind and plunge straight into your limbic system, triggering an instinctual, primal flight or fight response. This isn't a cheerful, comforting Christmas melody. It's the visceral, unsettling soundtrack to your deepest, darkest nightmares, a warning siren of primordial fear. And then, with terrifying suddenness, they appear. Not just one solitary figure, but a surging, snarling horde. They burst forth from the suffocating darkness, illuminated dramatically by flickering torchlight, the searing beams of strategically placed spotlights, and sometimes even by controlled pyrotechnics. Flames erupting, sparks flying, adding a hellish, infernal glow to the already nightmarish scene. These are emphatically not flimsy Halloween costumes made of cheap plastic and polyester. These are masterpieces of terror, each one a testament to artistry and dedication. The masks, often painstakingly hand-carved from robust wood, are intricate, grotesque works of art in themselves, contorted faces frozen in expressions of demonic glee or bestial rage, eyes that glow an unnatural, infernal red, impossibly long, slavering tongues that seem to drip with menace, and immense, curling goat or ram horns that seem to defy gravity, reaching towards the cold, starry sky. Each mask is a unique expression of horror, a crafted face of pure, unadulterated menace, often reflecting regional styles and ancient traditions. Beneath these custom-crafted, often incredibly valuable masks, the Krampus figures are clad in thick, shaggy furs, almost universally real goat or sheep hide, adding immensely to their brutal, bestial authenticity and their intimidating bulk. Their powerful bodies are adorned with clanging bells, sometimes enormous cowbells that vibrate through the chest, and, of course, the ubiquitous heavy iron chains, dragging and rattling with every deliberate, menacing step. Some figures carry flaming torches aloft, their smoke and wild, dancing light adding an even more infernal, chaotic glow to the already overwhelming scene. Others brandish imposing bundles of birch rods, the root, tied tightly with coarse twine or leather, and it must be stressed, these are not just for show, but for actual, albeit symbolic, use. And this is precisely where the run part of Krampuslauf becomes critical, becomes real. These are not static figures standing passively by. They are active, aggressive, and undeniably interactive participants in a terrifying dance. They surge through the tightly packed crowds, often singling out spectators with unnerving precision. The terror is immediate, personal, and profoundly interactive. Krampus figures will stomp their hooves with bone-jarring force. They will let loose deep, guttural roars that seem to shake the very ground. They will shake their chains menacingly, sending shivers down spines, and they will lean uncomfortably close into the crowd, their glowing, malevolent eyes fixed with predatory intensity on unsuspecting, wide-eyed faces. For the adults in the crowd, it's an exhilarating, adrenaline-fueled dance with danger, a thrilling flirtation with ancient fear. For the children, who are often kept at a slightly safer distance by nervous parents, or perhaps brought specifically for a milder, earlier afternoon experience, it's a living nightmare, a chilling, unforgettable lesson in consequence that no gentle bedtime story or stern lecture could ever hope to convey. The birch switch is indeed used. Not indiscriminately, not with true malicious intent to inflict serious harm, and usually with a surprising degree of control despite the chaos. However, light, stinging taps on legs, arms, or backs are common, an expected, almost ritualistic punishment for the gathered crowd, a physical reminder that in the eyes of Krampus, none are entirely free from some degree of sin or imperfection. The sting is sharp, momentary, but the psychological impact is profound and lasting. It's a tangible physical connection to the ancient folklore, a visceral jolt that says, this is real. This demon, this ancient force, can physically touch you, it can mark you, it grounds the myth in a stark, unforgettable reality. The overall atmosphere of a Krampuslauf is a chaotic symphony of intense sights, sounds, and sensations. The relentless rhythmic clanging of heavy chains, the deep, guttural, animalistic growls of the Krampus figures, the excited screams and nervous, half-hysterical laughter of the crowd, the crackle of open fires, the swirling smoke that hangs heavy in the frigid air, the scent of burning wood and singed fur. It's overwhelming, disorienting, and utterly captivating. A sensory overload designed to immerse you completely. It's a controlled chaos, a communal purging of fear, a collective, almost primal embrace of the dark, unsettling side of winter that modern society usually tries to bury. It's a temporary journey back to a time when such primal fears were a daily reality. One of the most striking and fascinating aspects of Krampusnacht today is the dramatic transformation of the crowd itself. Spectators are not merely passive observers, detached from the action. Number. They are, in a very real sense, an integral part of the spectacle. There's a dynamic, almost symbiotic interplay between the costumed figures and the onlookers. People actively anticipate being approached. They often egg on the Krampus. They scream with a mixture of genuine terror and delighted exhilaration when singled out. It's a shared, collective experience, a powerful release valve for communal anxieties, a fleeting moment where the modern world's rigid boundaries of civility and order are momentarily dissolved, allowing ancient, primal fears and instincts to surface, to be confronted, and ultimately to be celebrated. It's an act of cultural immersion and participation. And amidst this terrifying, swirling throng of demons and delighted screams, you will almost invariably find the occasional, serene figure of Saint Nicholas. He walks calmly, sometimes silently, through the chaotic pandemonium, a stark white figure of purity and benevolence amidst the black and brown fur, the glowing red eyes, and the clanging chains of the demons. His quiet presence provides the essential counterpoint, the moral anchor that prevents the entire event from descending into pure, unadulterated paganism. He blesses good children, hands out sweets and small gifts, and offers a quiet, reassuring moment of grace. This deliberate, powerful dual presentation of good and evil, of light and shadow, is absolutely critical to the Krampusnacht tradition. It reinforces the ancient, deeply ingrained balance. Kindness, mercy, and generosity mean nothing without the chilling, ever-present fear of their absence. The light is only truly appreciated, truly meaningful, because of the oppressive, omnipresent darkness that Krampus embodies. It's a living, breathing morality play, writ large and terrifyingly real on the stage of the winter night, a constant reminder of the choices humanity faces. The dramatic resurgence and astonishing global explosion of Krampusnacht and the Krampuslauf in the late 20th and early 21st centuries is a truly fascinating phenomenon. It speaks to a deep, perhaps unconscious human need to reconnect with older, more primal traditions, to experience raw, visceral emotions that the sanitized, predictable, and increasingly digital pace of modern life often smooths over or denies. In a world of increasing comfort and control, Krampus offers a potent, exhilarating dose of the unpredictable, a safe space, however unsettling, to confront and release deep-seated primal fears without true danger. It's a powerful, defiant rebellion against the saccharine sweetness, the commercialized banality, and the enforced cheer of modern Christmas. It is a defiant, unapologetic embrace of the darker, more unsettling, yet profoundly authentic aspects of the holiday season and the human psyche. Furthermore, the popularity has exploded globally, thanks largely to the democratizing power of the internet and the pervasive influence of pop culture. What was once a relatively isolated, regional alpine tradition is now known and celebrated worldwide. Videos of Krampuslauf go viral with alarming regularity, drawing new fascination and even inspiring similar events and participants from far beyond its traditional heartland. This global recognition, while undoubtedly bringing new life and new audiences to the tradition, also subtly changes it, pushing it further into the realm of organized performance and spectacle, perhaps diluting some of its purely local ritualistic significance. But the core remains powerfully intact: the fear, the electrifying spectacle, the communal experience, and the undeniable draw of the monstrous. The experience of a Krampuslauf is profoundly unsettling, yet undeniably exhilarating. It strips away the comforting veneer of modernity, plunging you back into a visceral, primordial time when winter was truly dangerous, when wild beasts roamed, and when the line between man and beast, between good and evil, between safety and absolute terror, was terrifyingly thin and easily crossed. It reminds you that fear in a controlled environment can be exciting, even purifying. that the dark can be captivating and profoundly meaningful, and that sometimes the most enduring and resonant traditions are precisely those that embrace the very things we try hardest to push away and forget. It's a testament to the enduring power of the shadow. So, as December 5th approaches, as the days shorten and the nights lengthen, listen closely to the wind. You might just hear it, a faint, rhythmic clanging in the distance, growing louder, more insistent, more terrifying with every beat. It's the unmistakable sound of ancient fear made flesh, of winter's oldest, most resilient monster reclaiming his night, his power, and his terrifying purpose. It's Krampusnacht, and he's coming for you. For centuries, Krampus was a terrifying whisper in the Alpine valleys, a shadow to St. Nicholas, a local enforcer of ancient fears. Even his resurgence in Krampuslauf was initially a regional phenomenon, a powerful, visceral return to tradition. But then something shifted. The internet arrived. Global media exploded, and suddenly Krampus, the ancient Alpine demon, went viral. He leapt from his mountain strongholds onto screens worldwide, transforming from revered folklore into a global sensation, a terrifying modern monster ready for consumption. This shift, largely beginning in the late 20th and accelerating into the 21st century, is a fascinating, if somewhat bittersweet, chapter in Krampus's long history. The digital age, with its insatiable appetite for the novel, the macabre, and the culturally exotic, found in Krampus a perfect, ready-made icon. He was everything traditional Christmas wasn't: dark, dangerous, edgy, and unapologetically terrifying. He was the anti-Santa, and the world was utterly captivated. His global rebirth began subtly, perhaps with grainy videos of Krampusläufer circulating on early internet forums, then exploding onto platforms like YouTube. Images of intricately carved wooden masks, of fur-clad figures dragging chains through snowy streets, captured imaginations. People who had never heard of the Alps, let alone Krampus, were suddenly exposed to this mesmerizing, terrifying figure. Who is this demon, they asked. Why haven't we heard of him? The mystery, the exoticism, and the sheer audacity of a demonic Christmas figure were irresistible. From viral internet fame, Krampus quickly made the leap into pop culture. He became a staple of dark holiday themes. His image adorned a dizzying array of merchandise: t-shirts, holiday cards, mugs, ornaments, action figures. He became a brand, a marketable entity. This transformation from fearsome cultural figure to mass-produced commodity is perhaps the most significant, and for purists, the most disheartening aspect of his modern evolution. The fear, the deep historical context, the ritualistic purpose, these began to be diluted, flattened, and packaged for a global audience whose primary interest was novelty and entertainment. Hollywood, ever keen to capitalize on compelling mythology, soon came calling. Krampus, the ultimate Christmas boogeyman, was perfect for horror films. The 2015 film Krampus, directed by Michael Dougherty, stands as a prime example. It introduced Krampus to millions who might never have seen a viral video or read a folklore book. The movie, while entertaining and genuinely unsettling at times, necessarily streamlined and reinterpreted the lore, stripping away much of the nuanced cultural context for the sake of a digestible, marketable horror narrative. This film, along with others and numerous television appearances, cemented Krampus's place in the global horror pantheon, but also solidified his image as simply evil Christmas demon, often detached from his original role as a moral enforcer. The appeal of Krampus in pop culture is multifaceted. For one, he offers a refreshing antidote to the perceived saccharine sweetness and commercialized blandness of traditional Christmas. In a world saturated with Santa, snowmen, and reindeer, Krampus provides an edgy alternative narrative. He caters to a growing appetite for the macabre, for horror that can be safely enjoyed, for traditions that challenge conventional norms. He allows people to indulge in the darker aspects of the human psyche during a season often dictated by enforced cheerfulness. He represents the shadow self of Christmas, a necessary counterpoint to its relentless optimism. However, this global embrace comes with a cost. The commodification of Krampus often means the trivialization of his terrifying origin. The complex pagan roots, the delicate syncretism with early Christian morality, the generations of ingrained fear that gave him his power, these are often lost in translation. He becomes a cool monster, a fun villain, a Halloween costume for December. The genuine cultural reverence, the chilling respect that Alpine villagers once held for him is replaced by consumer interest. The terrifying moral enforcer becomes simply entertainment. This shift evokes a certain disappointment, a reflective sorrow. The raw, visceral fear that once prompted children to behave, that fostered communal bonds in the face of ancient dread, is now largely a nostalgic thrill. The horror, once deeply personal and culturally resonant, is now consumed like any other piece of media. The rattling chains and stinging switches, once instruments of potent social control, become theatrical gestures for an audience. The deep ancestral understanding of what winter truly meant, of nature's unforgiving balance, becomes abstracted, a theme rather than a lived reality. Think about it. In his original context, Krampus was genuinely terrifying because his threats felt real. Being carried off to the underworld, being beaten for your sins, these were concrete fears in a world where disease, famine, and harsh weather were ever-present dangers. Today, for most global consumers of Krampus imagery, these threats are purely symbolic. We enjoy the horror from a safe distance, insulated by modernity, by central heating, by the comforting knowledge that Krampus is, after all, just a story. Or is he? This isn't to say that the modern resurgence is entirely negative. It has undeniably brought renewed interest to Alpine folklore, spurred academic research, and revitalized Krampuslauf celebrations in their native lands, sometimes even attracting tourism. It's a testament to the enduring power of his image that he has managed to capture global attention. But the cost of this widespread appeal is a certain flattening of his depth, a transformation from a figure of profound cultural significance into a commercial product. The modern monster is slicker, more stylized, often ironically humorous. He's on ugly Christmas sweaters, adorning craft beers, and featured in memes. He's been defanged, in a way, his true terror blunted by familiarity and mass production. He's no longer the untamed entity of the Rauhnächte, but a tamed, marketable version of himself, a Christmas demon on a leash. The narration tone here must be reflective, almost mournful. It's the lament for a powerful, terrifying deity reduced to a novelty item. It's the observation that humanity, in its quest to consume and categorize everything, often strips away the very essence of what made something powerful in the first place. The fear became entertainment. The profound became superficial, the truly terrifying became merely cool. Yet even in this commodified form, a spark of the original menace remains. Why else would he be so popular? Why else do people still shiver when they see a truly well-made Krampus mask or hear the clang of chains in a dark alley? Because deep down, the primal fear that gave birth to Krampus still resonates. The ancient understanding of balance, of consequences, of the shadows that lurk even in the brightest seasons remains ingrained in our collective consciousness. So, while the modern monster may be gracing greeting cards and blockbuster films, a part of him still yearns for the biting alpine winds, the genuine screams of terrified children, and the profound, unquestioning fear that fueled his very existence. He may be a commodity, but in his core, he is still the beast. He simply waited for the world to forget what winter truly meant. And then, he walked back in through the open door of pop culture, ready to remind us, even if only for entertainment, that some fears never truly die. We've journeyed through the icy grip of ancient pagan fears, witnessed the birth of Krampus from the crucible of Christianization, examined his terrifying tools, endured his long suppression, and seen his explosive resurgence in the modern world. But to truly grasp the profound significance of Krampus, to understand why he has resonated across centuries and cultures, we must delve into his most essential aspect, his symbiotic relationship with Saint Nicholas. This isn't just two characters in a story, it's a fundamental dual nature, a symbolic balance, a living, breathing paradox that speaks to the deepest psychological truths of the human experience. Imagine the annual procession, the Krampuslauf. On one hand, you have the serene, benevolent figure of Saint Nicholas. Dressed in his bishop's robes, often with a mitre and crozier, he moves with quiet dignity, a symbol of divine grace, generosity, and unconditional love. He offers gifts, blessings, and comfort to the deserving, a beacon of light in the depths of winter's darkness. He represents hope, salvation, and the promise of reward. He embodies the gentle, merciful aspect of the divine, the warmth of charity that protects against the cold. But just behind him, or perhaps surging before him, creating a path of terror, is Krampus, a creature of chaos, fur and horns, clanging chains and stinging switches. He represents the antithesis, punishment, damnation, the reckoning for misdeeds. He embodies the untamed, the demonic, the raw, brutal justice of an unforgiving world. He is the shadow to Nicholas's light, the cold to his warmth, the fear to his love. This isn't merely a contrasting pair, it's a deeply resonant moral and psychological balance. St. Nicholas and Krampus are two sides of the same coin, each defining and giving meaning to the other. Without the terrifying presence of Krampus, the kindness of St. Nicholas would lose its edge, its profound impact. How truly benevolent is a gift if there are no consequences for wickedness? How meaningful is grace if there is no genuine threat of damnation? The kindness of winter, its precious warmth and joy, means nothing, truly nothing, without the primal fear of its brutal, unforgiving cold. This duality taps into ancient spiritual concepts. Across countless mythologies and philosophies, balance is a fundamental principle. Light needs darkness, order needs chaos, creation needs destruction. The presence of a punitive, frightening figure alongside a benevolent one is a common archetype because it speaks to a universal human understanding of cosmic justice and moral order. Life is not all sweetness. There is pain, suffering, and consequences for actions. Krampus brings this stark reality into sharp, terrifying focus. Psychologically, this partnership is incredibly potent. For children, it's a brilliant, albeit brutal, lesson in moral accountability. St. Nicholas represents the ideals we strive for, the rewards for good behavior. Krampus represents the inescapable consequences of straying from those ideals. It's a physical manifestation of conscience, a tangible representation of the internal struggle between right and wrong. The fear of Krampus is, in a way, the externalization of the fear of one's own bad choices and their potential repercussions. This fear is a powerful deterrent, far more effective than abstract notions of being good for goodness' sake. It's the direct, visceral threat that transforms moral lessons into lived experience. Consider the role of fear itself. In modern, sanitized societies, we often view fear as something inherently negative, something to be avoided at all costs. But ancient cultures understood fear differently. It was a teacher, a protector, a force that ensured survival. The fear of winter's brutality taught respect for nature. The fear of societal ostracization ensured communal cooperation. Krampus, in this context, harnesses that ancient, beneficial aspect of fear. He's not just a monster, he's a necessary force, reminding humanity of the boundaries, of the consequences that uphold the very fabric of society. He is the guardian of ethical conduct, albeit a terrifying one. The terror aspect of Krampus also serves a vital function in communal catharsis. During a Krampuslauf, the collective experience of fear, followed by relief, can be incredibly bonding. People scream, they laugh nervously, they grab onto each other. This shared encounter with a controlled terror allows for a release of tension, a communal acknowledgement of the darker aspects of life, and a deeper appreciation for the comfort and safety that St. Nicholas symbolizes. It's a ritualistic confronting of evil, a way to acknowledge the shadows without being consumed by them. This duality also speaks to the profound mystery of winter itself. Winter is a season of stark contrasts. It brings the beauty of pristine snow, the quiet intimacy of families gathered by the fire, the hope of rebirth symbolized by Christmas. But it also brings unimaginable cold, scarcity, blizzards that can kill, and the longest, darkest nights. St. Nicholas represents the benevolent face of winter, its capacity for stillness, reflection, and quiet joy. Krampus embodies its brutal, unforgiving aspect, its capacity for death, destruction, and terror. Together they form a complete picture of the season, a holistic understanding that true wisdom acknowledges both the light and the shadow. Furthermore, the St. Nicholas-Krampus pairing can be seen as a continuation of ancient pagan dualisms absorbed by Christianity. The Perchten had their Schönperchten and Schaakperchten. The wild hunt, while terrifying, was also a force that cleared the old to make way for the new. The very act of cleansing, even through pain, implied a renewal. Christianity itself, while emphasizing a benevolent God, also has a powerful concept of Satan, of hell, of judgment, of the need for discipline to achieve salvation. Krampus provides the tangible bridge between these ancient and new dualities. He is the demonic figure who, paradoxically, serves a divine purpose: to scare you straight. In essence, Krampus is the moral compass of the Alpine winter, swung by a demonic hand. He ensures that the goodwill and generosity of St. Nicholas are not taken for granted, that they are earned, and that their value is understood against the backdrop of potential loss and punishment. He reminds us that the choices we make have weight, that there are repercussions, and that true virtue is often forged in the crucible of temptation and the fear of falling short. This dual nature ultimately creates a far richer, more meaningful tradition than either figure could achieve alone. St. Nicholas, without Krampus, might become overly saccharine, his message diluted by endless cheer. Krampus, without St. Nicholas, would simply be a monstrous demon, pure terror without a moral framework, a figure of nihilistic fear. Together, they create a complete ethical landscape, a powerful pedagogical tool, and a profound reflection on the human condition. The symbolism of Santa's shadow flickering into Krampus's silhouette is therefore not just a visual trick, it's the core thematic statement of the entire narrative. It suggests that Krampus is not just an external entity, but perhaps an intrinsic part of the human experience, the shadow self of our collective morality. He is the embodiment of the darkness that makes light meaningful, the fear that makes kindness resonate, the punishment that gives weight to grace. He is the constant, chilling reminder that balance is not merely an abstract concept, but a lived, often terrifying reality. The kindness of winter means nothing without the fear of it. And in this terrifying equilibrium, Krampus finds his enduring, unsettling power, forever tethered to his benevolent counterpart, ensuring that the lessons of the Alpine winter, both gentle and brutal, are never truly forgotten. We've followed Krampus through the chilling mists of pre-Christian Alpine winters, seen him forged in the uneasy marriage of pagan dread and Christian doctrine, observed his ancient tools of terror, witnessed his defiant survival through centuries of suppression, and experienced his thunderous modern resurgence in a world hungry for the macabre. We've dissected his dual nature, understanding that he is not just a monster, but the essential shadow that gives St. Nicholas's light its profound meaning. But as our journey nears its end, one chilling truth remains. Krampus, the embodiment of winter's brutal judgment, was never truly gone. He merely waited. Let's return to that opening storm. The relentless, biting wind scouring the snow-laden peaks, the deep, guttural growl of the coming blizzard, the way the world seemed to hold its breath under an impossibly dark sky. That primal, untamed winter, the one that birthed the Perchten and fueled the wild hunt, is a memory that modern society, in its relentless pursuit of comfort and control, has largely sought to forget. We've engineered away the darkness with electric lights, softened the cold with central heating, and tamed the wild with supermarkets and supply chains. We've replaced primal fear with festive cheer, the stark reality of survival with the predictable rhythm of consumerism. But you cannot truly forget something that is hardwired into the human experience. You cannot erase the ancestral memory of vulnerability, of consequence, of the inherent darkness that exists within nature and within ourselves. Krampus, in his essence, represents this forgotten truth. He is the chilling specter of what happens when we become complacent, when we take kindness for granted, when we believe ourselves to be entirely safe from the ancient, unforgiving forces that once shaped human civilization. His modern resurgence, his transition from regional folklore to global pop culture icon, is more than just a trend. It's a collective, perhaps subconscious, yearning for that forgotten fear. In a world that often feels too safe, too soft, too disconnected from the raw edges of existence, Krampus offers a potent, cathartic reconnection. We crave the thrill of the chase, the jingle of the chains, the sting of the birch. because deep down we instinctively understand that without that shadow, the light loses its definition. Without the threat of the beast, the kindness of the saint becomes less meaningful, less impactful. But this return is not just about entertainment. It's a profound cultural echo. In an age where moral relativism often blurs the lines of right and wrong, where individual actions sometimes seem to carry no tangible consequences, Krampus emerges as a stark, uncompromising figure of absolute judgment. He is the embodiment of accountability, a terrifying reminder that some actions do have repercussions, that wickedness will be met with punishment. He speaks to a deep, inherent human desire for justice, for balance, even if that justice comes wrapped in fur and dragging chains. He forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. The darkness isn't just external, it resides within us all. The naughty children Krampus pursues are not just misbehaving kids. They are symbolic of the selfish, greedy, and unkind impulses that we all possess. Krampus holds a mirror to our own failings, our own capacity for malevolence, and demands that we face them. He is the shadow self of humanity made manifest. Consider the narrative arc of our journey, from primordial fear, through syncretic creation, down into suppression, and finally bursting forth into global awareness. It's a story of resilience, of an idea so powerful, so fundamental to the human psyche that it simply refused to die. Governments and churches could burn his masks, ban his runs, and condemn his image, but they could never truly extinguish the concept he represented. Because that concept, the primal fear of winter's judgment, the necessity of consequence, the inherent duality of existence, is not something invented, it is something discovered within the human condition. Krampus never left the consciousness of the Alpine people. He merely retreated into the whispers, into the hidden nooks of tradition, into the ancestral memory. He waited patiently, like the deep snows of winter wait for their season. He waited for the world to become complacent, to forget the harsh lessons of its past, to embrace a comfortable narrative that conveniently omitted the terrifying truths. And now he has returned, not just as a holiday novelty, not just as a horror movie monster, but as a chilling reminder of what we have collectively tried to ignore. He reminds us that the wildness of nature, the darkness within humanity, the cold, hard reality of consequences, these things are always present, always lurking just beyond the edge of our manufactured comfort. He has returned because we, perhaps subconsciously, invited him back. We needed his raw truth, his terrifying clarity, to cut through the synthetic cheer and the moral ambiguity of our times. We needed him to remind us that balance is essential, and that sometimes the kindness of winter means nothing without the profound, visceral, and utterly terrifying fear of it. So, as the nights grow long and the world prepares for its annual festivities, listen. Listen carefully. Do you hear it? The faint, rhythmic clang of chains, growing closer. It's the sound of ancient winter, returning. It's the sound of justice, reawakened. It's the sound of fear, reclaiming its rightful place. He never left. He simply waited for the world to forget what winter truly meant. And now, he's here.